Well, can we turn please to the book of Esther? I'm going to begin this study of the book of Esther. We're not going to go through it verse by verse, but we're going to maybe do an overview of this book. You'll find it, if you go back to the Psalms and then go back from there, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job, and then the Psalms. But the book of Esther is a very important book, and so we're going to begin a study. We've maybe got 5 studies on the book of Esther. Let me just say something about Esther before we begin the study, and that is that Esther has a unique place in the Bible. There are 2 books in the Bible that bear the names of women, as you know. There's the book of Ruth and there's the book of Esther. And the important thing is that these 2 books are deliberately, I think, set in contrast to each other. So in the book of Ruth, you have a Gentile girl, a non-Jewish girl who comes to Israel. Ruth was a Moabitess, we might remember. And she came to Israel, and she was blessed there. And in the book of Esther, we have a Jewish girl who is in Persia. So she's gone to Persia. She's part of the captivity. So it's a contrast even in that sense that here is a non-Jewish girl who's come to Israel, and here's a Jewish girl who's been taken down to Persia. So it's quite interesting. It's also a contrast because, of course, in the book of Ruth, it's really the story of a peasant girl. She's gleaning in the field. They've got nothing really. When you come to the book of Esther, she's a queen. And so it's the opposite extremes almost. In the book of Ruth, you're really, the background is the field. It's the harvest time, and you remember the details of the book of Ruth. The background is definitely the field. But in the book of Esther, the background's the palace. And so you've got this contrast between the book of Ruth and the book of Esther. And it's very important. God has placed it here for a very specific reason. It's the only book in the Bible that God has never mentioned. That's quite astounding, isn't it? You'd think in all the books of the Bible, surely God has mentioned. And something else, nobody ever prays in the book of Esther. Nobody prays. Nobody refers to the law or the Old Testament or any other prophet or any other person in history of Israel that's gone before. In fact, it's so strange in that sense that even a man like Martin Luther, he said he wished it wasn't in the Bible because he couldn't make head nor tail of it. He didn't know why it was there because there's no mention of God, there's no mention of prayer, there's no mention of the feasts, the Sabbath, the Bible, the Word of God, the Psalms, the law. There's nothing like that. And you might think, well, this is a strange book. No mention of God, no mention of praying, no mention of the normal things you'd associate with the Old Testament. The whole point of the book of Esther is this, that God is working behind the scenes. That's the whole point of it. And I don't know if you know much about the book of Esther, but let me just give you a very brief snapshot of it. Basically, this girl is taken, she's placed in the palace, she's made the queen, and a plot is being hatched by the enemy of the Jews to annihilate the Jews. Haman, a wicked man in the palace in Persia, he wants to eliminate the Jewish race. They've been taken down there in captivity, and he wants to wipe them out. And Esther is the one who's going to stop him. And this is why this it's an exciting book. It's a fascinating book. I like spy stories and this is God's secret agent. And I was saying the other day that they refer to some spies are what they call sleeper agents. In other words, they're placed in a position and they're left there for years. And then suddenly they're activated to do their work. And it seems that God has placed this girl just where he wants her. And he's going to activate her. And he is going to accomplish great things. Brothers and sisters, the great thing about the book of Esther, I think, is this. That sometimes God is working in our lives behind the scenes and we don't really notice it. It's not up front, it's not out there, it doesn't come with here's God at work. But God is moving in our lives, arranging things for his purposes, and we're going to discover that this is a very interesting book indeed. Now, let me just say something about the book as a whole. Chapters 1 and 2 are really, it's all about feasts. There are lots of celebrations and banquets and feasts and parties in this book. It's about a palace and a king who was at the top of his power and his wealth. And you'll find that in chapters 1 and 2, the feast that's most important is a feast arranged by the king Ahasuerus. We're going to read about it today. In chapter 3 through to 7, there's another feast that's important. That's the feast of Esther. Esther makes a feast in the palace. And then chapter 8 through to 10, to the end, it's another feast, a new feast called Purim. Now, the Jewish people still celebrate Purim today. I think it's in March or April. And it's a time of great rejoicing. And we're going to discover why when we get to the end. Because it celebrates what Esther did. They still celebrate it today. Israelis still hold the Feast of Purim because it's a celebration of what Esther did. So, what I want to do, that's a sketchy overview. I want to look at 5 things about Esther. First of all, 5, not all today, but our studies are going to be like this. First of all, we're going to look today at her placing. God placed her just where he wanted her to be. And then we're going to think of her peril. Because although she was in a very privileged position, she was in great danger. We're going to discover why. Then we're going to think of her petition. Because she has got to come to the king, we're going to discover this and how she does it, and she has got to put her life on the line, basically, and ask him for something. This is why God has placed her in this position. And so her placing, her peril, her petition, and then we're going to finish off with thinking of her party. Because there was a great celebration at the end, and it became known as Esther's Feast, because of how this whole book developed. So today, it's a very sketchy overview of the book, but today I just want to say something about her placing, how God placed Esther just where he wanted her to be. So let's read a few verses. Esther, chapter 1, verse 1. Now it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. Now here's the big king. Ahasuerus. This is Ahasuerus, which reigned, look at the extent of his kingdom, from India to Ethiopia. It's a vast area. Over 127 provinces. That in those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, or Susa, the palace, in the 3rd year of his reign, he made a feast. He's always making feasts, this guy, we're going to discover. He made a feast unto all his princes and his servants, the power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of the provinces being before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the honour of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. What? 180 days feast? That's some feast, isn't it? That's some celebration. But he's not finished. Verse 5, when those days were expired, he made a feast unto all the people. So his first feast was for the princes and for the nobles and for the important, the bigwigs. Now he's going to have one for the people. And so he makes a big feast. We're not going to, you can read all about it, all about the splendour, the luxury of this feast. This wasn't a bank holiday. This was something really special. And then, we're not finished yet. Look at verse 9. Also, Vashti, the queen, she made a feast as well. So she's got a feast for the woman in the royal house that belonged to King Ahasuerus. So, the opening of this book is all about this man and all his wealth and his splendour and all that he has and the great kingdom that he reigns over, and he's feasting. He's just having a great time, and his subjects and his nobles, his princes, his people, the women, everyone is having a great feast. Now, look at verse 10. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar and Carcass, I won't ask you to repeat these, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princess her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore the king was very wroth, and his anger burned in him. Now this is the first incident, the first drama in this exciting story. Basically, here is a man, he just gets a bit carried away. He's showing off, basically, and he's drunk. Well, he couldn't get a worse combination. And he says, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll have a beauty parade. You've never seen my wife? Of course, in those days, the women were kept very separate and they had their own thing going on. And he said, you've never seen such a beautiful woman as this. I'll bring her in. I'll make an exhibition of my wife to all these drunken men. Can you imagine it? This was a dreadful man, really. And so he sends his chamberlain saying, go and bring my wife and tell her to come in and we're all going to gaze at her and see how beautiful she is. And you can imagine the scene. All these men will be drunk and it would be absolutely dreadful for such a thing to happen. So Vashti, she's got more sense. She refuses. I'm not coming. Now, I'm not going to read the rest of the chapter, but basically the rest of the chapter is that he's furious. Of course he is. His ego in front of all these people. And in those days, you asked your wife to jump and she said, how high? So in those days, I mean, he's really, this is a loss of face for Ahasuerus. He's thinking, I'm absolutely furious. In front of all these people, I'm showing off to them all, and I can command from India to Ethiopia, I can't even tell my wife to come in. She won't obey me. He's furious. She says, what are we going to do? So they're all in a huddle now deciding, what are you going to do? Well, you could ignore it, or you could, no, if you ignore it, that just causes a problem, because now there'll be a rebellion. All the women in the whole kingdom will think, we can do this to our husbands, we can disobey them. That's dreadful. So what you've got to do is you've got to depose Vashti. Get rid of her. She's no longer the queen. And so that's what he does. He basically gets rid of Vashti and says, right, Vashti, your day is over, forget. We don't know what happened to her, but she's no longer the queen anyway. She's lost her position. And quite a time elapses. We're not going to read all the story, but if you come into chapter 2, you'll discover verse 1, after these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus was appeased, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what was decreed against her. Then said the king's servants that minister unto him, let there be fair young virgins sought for the king. So things get from bad to worse. Here's a drunken man in the chapter 1 trying to make an exhibition of his wife, and she refuses to come, and he dismisses her, but he's calmed down now. And now the chamberlain's saying, no, you need another wife. So what we'll do is we'll cast the net out. We'll look for all the beautiful girls in the kingdom. We'll bring them all to you. Now, this is absolutely dreadful, folks, when we read about it, because what happened was basically this, that his officers went out, and if they knew of people who had a girl who was a beautiful girl, then she would be selected, and she would be brought to the king. And basically what happened, I'm not going to go into all the details, but basically what happened, that they were kept for a while, and they were in the harem, they call it. They were kept. The girls were all kept together, and they were given clothing, and they were smartened up and made to look nice and all that. And then one by one they came in, spent a night with Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus decided whether you'll be my wife or not, and if not, you'll just become one of my concubines. That's it. You're living at the palace, and if I call for you, you'll come, and if not, well, that's it. But you're mine now anyway. So, a dreadful situation. Now, look at verse 5. Now, in Shushan the palace, there was a certain Jew, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is, Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So it came to pass, when the king's commandment and his decree was heard, and when many maidens were gathered together unto Shushan the palace to the custody of Hegai, that Esther was brought also unto the king's house to the custody of Hegai, keeper of the woman. Now look at verse 10. Esther had not showed her people nor her kindred. In other words, she hasn't told anyone she's a Jew. For Mordecai had charged her that she should not show it. And Mordecai walked every day before the court of the woman's house to know how Esther did and what should become of her. What a situation to be in. Now don't think for a minute that Esther has somehow volunteered for this. This is coercion. Somebody has said, Mordecai's cousin, young cousin, she is a stunning girl. She should definitely be part of this. And so she's coerced into, she's in the palace. And you can imagine Mordecai, her cousin, who's really her guardian, and he's walking up and down outside wondering what's happening to her inside these walls. What's happening to Esther? And verse 15, now when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her for his daughter, was come to go in to the king. So it's her turn. They're all going in one by one night at a time. Dreadful situation. But listen to this. Verse 17, the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favour in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Now, then the king made a great feast. He's always making feasts unto all his princes and servants, even Esther's feast. And he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts. It's a big celebration. It's like a coronation according to the state of the king. And when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai sat in the gate. Now that doesn't just mean he sat at the gate in a seat. To sit in the gate of a city in Bible times means that you're in the government. You're part of the council of the city. That's what it means. And verse 20, Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people, for Mordecai had charged her. For Esther did the commandment of Mordecai, like as when she was brought up with him. So let's stop there. Sorry, we're packing in a lot of information here, but basically, what I want to focus on today, brothers and sisters, is this. That here is a woman, a young girl. Now, things have gone wrong in her life. Really badly. First of all, she has been part of the captivity. Now, without going into the history, there was a period when the nation of Israel were so bad and had done so much against God and turned away from God that God said, right, what you're going to need is a period in captivity. I'm going to deliver you, I'm going to judge you. And there was, at that time, the nation was divided into the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was known as Israel, the southern kingdom was known as Judah. And first of all, I think it was the northern kingdom. The Assyrians came across from the northeast and they came down into Israel and they took away captive all the Israelites. In the south, Jerusalem, Judah, they were still there, but then the Babylonians came over from the east and they attacked Jerusalem, and you can read all about it, and they took the people away captive down to Babylon. Babylon was conquered eventually by the Persians, and this is where the Persians are at the moment. But basically, the Israelites have been taken away in captivity. So here is the first thing about Esther. She's really a captive. She's in captivity. She's away from her home country. Second thing happens is this, that she loses both her mother and her father. We don't know how that happened. Here she's orphaned. And so things are going from bad to worse in a certain sense, that she's lost her mum and dad now. She's in a strange country. She's a captive down there. And Mordecai takes her in and is her guardian. And then things get even worse, because as she develops into this lovely girl, then this command comes out and suddenly she's snatched away from this home against her will and she is placed into the palace. You might think, it's out of the frying pan into the fire. It gets worse all the time. She's a captive, she loses her parents, she's an orphan. Now she's been brought up by a cousin who's quite a bit older than her, obviously. She's been brought up by him, and then suddenly the officers arrive at the door. We want the girl, and she's coming with us, and she disappears, the door's closed, and she's into the palace. And you might think things are going from bad to worse. Brothers and sisters, I just want to make the point today that just when things were at the worst and you think things are completely out of control, that was when God was placing Esther just where he wanted her to be. Now, that's all the lesson really we're going to take from today, but it's this great lesson that when things seem to us to be out of control, when things seem to be going from bad to worse, when nothing is working out the way that we think it should work out, just remember this, that God has a purpose in our lives and he is placing us where we are at this very moment. I find that's a great comfort, a great help for me. Because you see, it's very tempting to think, well, if only this would happen, if only I was there, if only I had this, if only my life had worked out like this, if only I was in this situation, if only I had that opportunity, then I'd be a lot better, I'd be able to do more for the Lord, I'd be a better Christian, if I was in a different situation, a different time, if things had worked, but things in my life have gone pear-shaped. Dear friends, Esther could have said exactly the same. She could have sat in the palace and wept and thought things have just got from bad to worse. What she didn't realise was that God had placed her there. I believe that. Do you believe that? Do you believe God's placed you where you are? Just for this very moment? I think if you get a hold of that, I know that sometimes God changes our circumstances and he puts into our minds a desire to do something else and to be something else, and that's very proper. But 9 times out of 10, or 99 times out of 100 even, I think God has placed us here for a reason. And he's got something for us to do. And things might be going wrong. And things might be turned upside down. And our lives might be taking what we think is a wrong turn. And all the time, God has got his hand on us. And he's just placing us exactly where he wants us to be. Now that's important. But we're not finished yet. Because look at the end of chapter 2. In these days, while Mordecai sat in the king's gate, 2 of the king's chamberlains, Bigthan and Teresh, of those which kept the door, were wroth, they were angry, and they sought to lay hand on King Ahasuerus. They're having a plot to kill him. The thing was known to Mordecai, who told it to Esther the queen. And Esther certified the king thereof in Mordecai's name, and when inquisition was made of the matter, it was found out. Therefore they were both hanged on a tree, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles before the king. So here is something that just seems to happen. Mordecai is sitting in the gate. He's got access to he's involved in the government. It's amazing, when you read about the Jews in the captivity, you think of men like Daniel. Daniel was basically the prime minister at one point. They were promoted because they were recognized that God was with them and they had skills and abilities that were in great demand. And it seems Mordecai, they know that he's a Jew, we'll discover that later on, but Mordecai is in a position of authority, and he hears this rumour that there are 2 others that are plotting against the king. So he gets in touch with Esther, and he tells Esther, and Esther tells the king, the thing's investigated, it's found, they're arrested, they're executed, and now this is very interesting. It's amazing how accurate the Bible is, because the Persians were, if you go down to the British Museum, you'll find lots of artefacts from the Persian reign. The Persians, when the Persian Empire was massive. And they had a tremendous system of recording their history. They wrote things down in tablets. They recorded the great records. In fact, some have even suggested that the book of Esther is actually an extract from the records of the Persian kings. It could well be. God has used that. However, so what happens is this. It's not just keeping a diary. This goes into the official records. This event that happened, this semi-rebellion that was snuffed out, and Mordecai found it out and so on, it's recorded there. You might think, well, what's the point of that? Well, we're going to discover that's exactly what's going to... This book's going to be opened again shortly. We're going to discover this. And the king's going to... It's as though he's forgotten all about Mordecai. He's going to suddenly be reading this book. Wait a minute. And he's going to ask, did we do anything for this man? Because it seems at the end of chapter 2 that poor Mordecai, he's discovered this plot. He's told the queen. He's basically saved the king's life, and nobody seems to give him any credit for it. He's not getting any credit for it. He's not even recognised. It seems it's just recorded, it's put away in a dusty book, and that's it. End of story. It's going to come to light later on. Brothers and sisters, here's another lesson that we're learning at this stage. That sometimes there are things that happen and things that we're involved in, and we would think by nature that maybe I should get more credit for that, or I should have been recognised, or somehow it's just been forgotten. Things that we've done in the past that maybe that we thought were so costly and so important, and yet nobody's even thinking about them. Everyone's forgotten about them. Just remember this, God doesn't forget. God doesn't forget. And there's a day coming when this book's going to be opened again, and this is going to be key to the whole thing. It's a fantastic story. I hope you're excited about it. It's a fantastic story, the story of Esther. But what I want to just close on today is this, that Esther, although she may not have recognised it, she was just in the place God wanted her and needed her to be. We're going to discover why. Because there's a peril, there's a great peril, a great persecution that's just about to break on the whole of the Jewish nation, and Esther is in the right place at the right time. Well, you find that in the New Testament, don't you? You find Paul in prison. Well, he wouldn't normally want to be there. He recognises God has placed him there. And so there are people hearing the gospel because Paul's in prison. There are things that happen to different people at different times that they wouldn't choose for themselves. But God is behind it. And let's just be encouraged by this, dear brother, dear sister, be encouraged by this today. That although things may seem to us to have gone wrong in our lives, or not turned out the way we thought they would, God has placed us there for a reason. And we're like sleeper agents. We're going to be activated. And God has placed us where we are for the furtherance of his purpose. Thank you.